Welcome to the Xi Omega Chapter Centennial Podcast Series, Xi Omega, A Century of Sisterhood and Service. I am Raven L. Hill, President of Xi Omega Chapter, the first and largest graduate chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated in Washington, D.C. For 100 years, Xi Omega has led with exceptional sisterhood and exemplary service. 2 Alpha Kappa Alpha founders were among the 20 visionaries who chartered our chapter in 1923. Through the years, Xi Omega has been home to several AKA founders, 3 AKA international presidents, and 6 North Atlantic regional directors. From our original 20 charter members to now almost 700 members, we are committed to continuing our legacy of sisterhood, scholarship, and service, in line with our mission to meet the needs of a dynamic and ever-changing world. Join us as we travel through the decades, exploring Xi Omega's growth and service legacy in our nation's capital and the global community. Each episode will showcase Xi Omega's contributions through narration, conversations, and interviews with our illustrious chapter members against the backdrop of the culture, politics, and music that encompass the African American experience of those times. So we ask that you sit back, relax, and enjoy as we bring you Xi Omega, A Century of Sisterhood and Service.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to the 1960s. The situation in America is turbulent and divisive, with political and cultural events that define the country for generations. The Civil Rights Movement, riots in urban cities, the Vietnam War, anti-war protests, the feminist movement. There are political assassinations that alter the course of U.S. history. President John F. Kennedy in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. The phrase Black Power is introduced by activist Stokely Carmichael at a 1966 rally. It sparks many Negroes to now identify as Black. The phrase, Black is beautiful, signifies the embrace of Black history and inspires pride for the culture and the rich legacy of Black achievements. The soundtrack of the era is punctuated by songs like Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come, soul singer Aretha Franklin's Respect, and James Brown belting out, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Musically, America is also experiencing what is called the British invasion of pop and rock music artists, the Beatles, the most famous. But the soundtrack of everyday life in the U.S. is the Motown sound, with its glorious melodies and killer hooks, soul and pop music. Berry Gordy leads one of the most successful Black-owned businesses and one of the most influential independent record companies in American history. Motown is the sound of young America, yet appeals to universal audiences. But back to the political events that define the 1960s. 3 major pieces of national legislation are passed over the course of the decade. The Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and the Fair Housing Act in 1968. Members of Xi Omega, along with AKA international leadership and members from around the nation, passionately participate in the struggle and protests that lead to the passage of these laws. A real triumph is the 1967 appointment of Thurgood Marshall to the United States Supreme Court, the first Black person to hold the position. A seminal event is the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, demanding equality for Black people in all aspects of American life. Over 250,000 people arrived by bus, train, car, and on foot. Hundreds of AKAs arrive from around the country, and Xi Omega members, as a group, attend the march, assembling at the Xi Omega House. Member Marion Tyrants, now 103 years old, remembers that day.
When things like that took place, the chapter established a leadership process, and of course, we had a house, and we decided what we were going to do, where we were going to meet, and as a group, march as a group to join the movement.
The day is peaceful and concludes with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his iconic I Have a Dream speech.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
In 1965, Xi Omega sends a telegram to President Lyndon Johnson expressing concern about the treatment of blacks during marches and protests in Selma, Alabama. The chapter also contributes to the clergymen who participated in the march from Selma to Montgomery. In 1967, Coretta Scott King becomes an honorary member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated in recognition for her work for equality, social and economic justice, and elevating the role of women in all aspects of society. In the mid-1960s, AKA on the national level is awarded a contract from the U.S. government to operate the first federal Job Corps Center for Women in Cleveland, Ohio. Over a 30-year period, the Cleveland Job Corps Center offers young women the academic, vocational, and social skills to become productive citizens. Several Xi Omega members and AKAs from local chapters visit the center. For many years, the Cleveland Job Corps Center had the distinction of being the only project of its kind sponsored by a predominantly black organization. Xi Omega's work with the Saturday School program enriches the lives of marginalized elementary school-age children through classroom instruction, field trips, and exploring music, art, black history, and culture. The families of the students receive professional consultations and referrals to social service programs and resources. The D.C. Government Office of Consumer Protection recognizes Xi Omega for these efforts. In 1968, Xi Omega celebrates the 60th anniversary of AKA with a grand gala at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, D.C. The Mayor-Commissioner of Washington, D.C., Walter E. Washington, and his wife, Bonetta Washington, a highly respected educator and member of AKA, are special guests. The mayor applauds the members of Xi Omega for their excellence in initiating and conducting civic projects for the betterment of residents in the District of Columbia.
Every lady ought to be. She ought to be Wahoo and AKA. Wahoo and AKA. Standards high in sisterhood.
Xi Omega's accomplishments stem from a strong foundation of working collaboratively as a sisterhood with a focus on service to all mankind. Sometimes this sisterhood is within the same family. Mothers and daughters and granddaughters, all AKAs. This is known as a legacy. You heard from Xi Omega member Marion Tyrants earlier. Her daughters, Carol and Diane, joined the sorority in 1967 and 1969, respectively. They were followed by their younger sister, Linda, 2 decades later in 1980, and by her daughter Tia in 2017. Miss Marion, now 103 years old, daughter Carol, and granddaughter Tia reflect on their AKA and Xi Omega family legacy.
There was something within me that they had seen that made them say, well, I'd like to be a member of that group. I see my mother so active. She has friends she developed great relationships with. And then as a whole, the chapter reached out and did things for the community. We didn't sit idly by and do nothing. If we saw a need over here, we went there.
It took me a while to realize it was that Mom had exposed us to a lot of the activities in the sense of working together with people that you may not know or know well, but doing the community service projects that we were involved in on campus and in the community. When we were younger, she took us to the sorority center, to the house on New Hampshire Avenue. And so while the committees and the people were working, we were down there also. We got to know and observe. And so like Mom sort of set the stage for us without our actually knowing that she wanted us to be a part of this organization.
Specifically in AKA, it means different generations bringing the different experiences, the different knowledge, the different impacts that they have on the organization and passing it down to their children and their children's children. And that's what my grandmother did. She passed it down to her 3 daughters, and my mother passed it down to me.
Xi Omega's Tyrants family on their AKA family legacy. 5 women were president of Xi Omega chapter in the 1960s. 16th president Esther G. Pollard served from 1959 through 1964. Scholarships for students were at the fore of her administration. 17th president Marion M. Murphy served from 1964 to 1965. She emphasized a commitment to human rights for all. The chapter's 18th president, Wilma G. Shepard, served from 1966 to 1967. Under her leadership, the chapter had a keen focus on volunteer service and financial support for senior citizens, including programs at D.C. General Hospital and Stoddard Baptist Home. Leading the chapter as the 19th president was Pauline O. E. Wallace, who served from 1968 to 1969. She was an accountant by profession and focused her term on policies and procedures for the chapter's financial success. Virgie C. Thompson was sworn in as Xi Omega's 20th president in December 1969. Her presidency began in January 1970. Learn more about her in our next podcast, The Decade of the 70s. A Century of Sisterhood and Service, The Decade of the 1960s, is brought to you by Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Xi Omega Chapter. Executive producer, Ayana Roche. Director of Research, Bonnie Jones Moon. Content producer, Catherine Holmes Johnson. Podcast editorial board, Nadine Eads, Lavdina Orr, Etta Williams. Copy editors, Sharon Anderson, Danielle Barrett, Carmelia L. Rush. Podcast theme by Paul Bailey with the Howard University Jazz Ensemble under the direction of Fred Irby III. Technical production, Ashley Donald. I'm Diane Johnson.
This is Xi Omega President Raven L. Hill again to thank you for listening to this month's episode of the Xi Omega Centennial Podcast, A Century of Sisterhood and Service. We hope you found it informative as well as entertaining, and that you will recommend it to your family and friends. We have dedicated a great deal of time to ensure that our centennial events are thought-provoking and interesting, and we hope you will have an opportunity to see some of the activities we have planned. To stay up to date with our calendar of events, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and online at akaxo.org. Don't forget to join us for next month's podcast episode on the 23rd as we continue our centennial journey from 1923 to 2023.